Welcome to ADHD is Over, a new podcast on a seemingly old label that we're going to be peeling off. Join my wife, Tatiana, and I as we journey with our family, the Wyden family, through the land of confusing information. We're going to visit both sides and let you decide because the power is with you. Welcome to ADHD is Over.
Today, my guest is Sue Parry. Sue is a former school-based occupational therapist and the mother of 3 sons that have been at risk for having ADHD and other learning problems. But today's episode is about one of Sue's sons, Andy, and the family's journey through the confusing, inconsistent, and very contradictory narrative of ADHD towards wholeness. Welcome, Sue.
Thank you very much, Roman, for having me.
It's my pleasure. I have to say, I've heard your story before. You and I have talked before, and I'm so touched by, first of all, how you stood for your son's well-being and how you spent a good amount of energy and time, and your family as well with your husband, to basically move towards wholeness and to allow Andy to be healthy and to thrive in life. And we're going to get into that later, what he's up to today. But I just want to acknowledge you for having taken the road less traveled, because I'm sure it wasn't always easy.
No, it wasn't easy at all. It was probably for about 6 to 8 years, it was a nightmare is the best way to describe it.
Perhaps take us back. I want to make sure, because I've heard your story and I want our listeners to really get sort of the important points. Take us back to when it all started, perhaps where you guys were living on Mercer Island.
Okay. So this ordeal started back in 1990, in May of 1990, when Andy was finishing up with kindergarten. It was an all-day program, and I remember I went down to the school one afternoon. It was just before the 3-day weekend of Memorial Day. School was going to be let out in a couple of weeks. And I remember his teacher just kind of took me aside and kind of casually mentioned that she was worried about Andy going on to first grade because it seemed to her that he wasn't reading as well as his classmates. And it was just kind of an incidental comment. And then she said, well, it might be because he has attention deficit disorder. And see, that was 30 years ago when it was still ADD, and ADHD hadn't really come into vogue yet. Mm-hmm. So she said, it's probably because he had ADD, and, over the summer, you might want to have it checked out. Well, I remember I picked up Andy from school and we walked home, and it was like, I really didn't think too much of it because my husband and I just thought Andy was doing fine for a little 6-year-old kindergartner and his reading. He was reading some of the basic books. He knew some sight words. He could read some sentences. He just academically, it seemed like, he'd made, decent scores during the school year, really liked art, liked to pretend, was happy and friendly. Mm-hmm. And I remember I relayed that to my husband. It's just like it was something that was so foreign to us, really. It was, looking back on it, it was kind of like, well, it changed my whole perception of Andy. At really, within a couple of days, it was like, what's going on here? Mm-hmm. So I remember we went through the summer and didn't act on anything. I had a lot of friends on Mercer Island, other moms. We knew, couples at get-togethers and everything. And it, once you're kind of tuned into this, it kind of became the buzz. So then Andy went on to first grade, and he had a teacher then, woman teacher, who'd been a teacher for a long time on Mercer Island. And she was very demanding, I would say, academically for kids, and didn't give the kids a lot of, I would call it wiggle room. Mm-hmm. And
that's a good word, right? Because
yeah, it wasn't.
The wiggles are sort of
wiggles. I mean, just psychologically or physically. Mm. And she and Andy and me too, we didn't hit it off real well, because I just thought she was too demanding. Now, our older son is 4 years older than Andy, and let me see, if Andy was in first grade, Ben was in fifth grade. And he was, he was just doing okay in school. No concerns, no reports of, behavior problems or academic problems. So here's Andy in first grade. And this teacher just Andy just made it through. Well, then Andy went into second grade and had another teacher who I thought she was very accepting and tolerant of different learning styles. And Andy was in that class for, 2 or 3 weeks. Well, at this school, they had just gotten some federal grant money. Well, they were starting a new program. It was not exactly special ed, but it was just to offer some assistance with children with learning differences. So, well, they evaluated Andy, and he qualified. Well, he just went in the morning, every other day, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, when they did the more academic stuff. And he did that for the first semester from September through December. Well, he just thrived, because in this program, there were maybe 10 or 12 kids, and it was very expressive and exploratory and hands-on and multisensory. Andy loved art. He still does. And it seemed to me that it offered a lot of the things that had just been removed from the regular classroom. Mm-hmm.
And this is, and he hasn't been officially diagnosed by then, right?
No, no. So this teacher she just thought Andy was a regular little boy, and ordinary, average, normal little boy, if there's such a thing. So Andy made it through first grade, or through second grade, doing quite well, not excelling, but he was thriving, we thought. So then he went into third grade. And once again, he had another teacher that was much like the first grade teacher. And come to find out, she had 2 teenage sons, 2 twin boys who had been diagnosed with ADHD and were on medication. So she was kind of like, she was a spotter. She was an ADH spotter, teacher spotter, which over the years I've come to find out, I'm not sure exactly the percentage of kids that are, referred to the doctor, what the percentage is that teachers, the teacher referrals, but I would say it's somewhere between 90 and 100% because it has to do with academic performance and achievement, and or behavioral problems. And that's where you see them in the classroom. Okay. So 3rd grade came around. This was in 1993. Mm-hmm. And at that point, we could see that Andy was having quite a bit of difficulty with the curriculum. Part of that was was it an advanced curriculum? I'm not sure. What I do know that in the community that we lived in, which was quite well off, very competitive, and I would have to say quite elitist. Many of the kids were getting supplemental tutoring. And it wasn't remedial tutoring, it was supplemental tutoring, so that the normal average child, like I just wasn't accustomed to seeking out tutoring for my children so that they could excel. We could have, if we wanted to, financially, we could have, but I didn't want to just whisk them off after school, before school, after school, or for tutoring. But a lot of parents were making that, if you want to call it a sacrifice. Anyway, so by 3rd grade, the school, this teacher was really pressuring us and said, and I think she was genuinely concerned about Andy's performance. So she recommended that we really seek medical attention with his pediatrician. And so we did.
Meaning talk to the pediatrician to get.
Oh yeah, talk to the pediatrician.
Tested, right. Yeah,
to get tested, and not only just by him, but also by the school psychologist. And so we still just didn't jump at this. We didn't embrace any of this. We weren't really resisting it, but we weren't seeking it out either. We were very, I would almost say, befuddled. Like, what?
Yeah.
What's wrong with Andy? What isn't he doing? He seemed like he was never he was never organized enough. He could never sit still quietly enough. He could never pay enough attention. He was just the never enough child. Okay, so then we went to his to the pediatrician.
Now, before you go to the pediatrician, there's this very fascinating brochure you've shared with me. Did this brochure come in before you went to the pediatrician? Was this something?
Yeah, I happen to have it right here. And
beautiful. Well, I just want for our listeners, I just want to set the context that this is a pharmaceutical company called Novartis at the time, and this is a Swiss company. I'm Swiss, so I know the name very well. And this was a brochure that was handed out at the school. Now tell me, who handed this brochure out, and at what point would this brochure normally get handed out? Before we read this very lovely sentence in there that I just mind-blowing, but who would hand this out and at what point?
it was either the teachers or the school psychologists.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a brochure. It's it's really more of a booklet, and it's let's see, it's a 15-page booklet, and it says here ADHD and learning disabilities. It says here there was one. It was a booklet for the classroom teacher and a booklet for the parent. What I have here is the booklet for the classroom teacher. I had one for she actually gave us both, but they were identical.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's written by Dr. Larry Silver. He's a psychiatrist. He's back in Potomac, Maryland. He's been very involved in the Learning Disabilities Association, the Learning Disabilities Association of America.
So this brochure, so it was given to you, and I remember you read to me one sentence that is beautifully highlighted. If you'd be so kind to read that sentence to us.
So what it says here, and this was because we were pretty kind of balking at what needed to be done, and this teacher felt like something really needed to be done with Andy. And so she gave us this brochure, and what it says here in a subsection, it says your role in ADHD. It says, if the child's doctor feels that the hyperactivity, distractibility, and or impulsivity stem from a specific nervous system-based disability, non-anxiety, or depression, he or she might prescribe medication. It says these medicines do not cure the ADHD. Instead, they appear to work by correcting for a lack of certain necessary brain chemicals in the nervous system. Parents should be aware that these medicines do not drug or alter the brain of the child. They make the child normal by correcting for a neurochemical imbalance.
Wow.
That's it.
So first of all, and you know exactly what I'm talking about, but just want to point out to the listeners that first of all, when we look at the word normal, right, I always start with that word. First of all is what is normal, and how can you actually prove that someone who was quote unquote abnormal first is now normal based or, comparing it to what? And I believe, as you know very well, it's an academic standard. It's like, do you now have good grades? Is the teacher less frustrated with the kid than before? So now he's back to normal, right? So we get that. And that's kind of like common sense. But in a brochure to say, once you take these drugs, the child will go back to normal and it's not going to harm the brain and it's a chemical imbalance is mind-blowing to me now, because this 30 years later, there's been many articles written by very credible scientists debunking that it's a chemical imbalance and debunking that actually these drugs don't have any harmful effect, right? Well, as a parent, when you got this brochure, what was your reaction to this statement?
Oh, my reaction was, we were really so confused and not knowing what to do. So if this makes Andy normal, so does this mean we have an abnormal child with, and it was just like, it was like, I'm speechless right now, because it really left us in a lurch of what do we do? What is it that Andy isn't doing? Mm-hmm. But I think more importantly, but also importantly, is that when we realized, when our skepticism was at an all-time high, of, well, why should we, medicate Andy or drug Andy, really?
Mm-hmm.
My husband, in his curiosity, well, since these books were from a pharmaceutical company, a pharmaceutical giant, why was a teacher giving us a booklet from a drug company?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to call it a pharmaceutical company, and I don't call the medications medication anymore. They're a drug. And so he wrote to the head school psychologist, and he asked some questions. And just real quickly here, he says, we have a booklet entitled ADHD, a booklet for parents by Dr. Larry Silver. Since these booklets appear to be readily available, I assume we order each one in sufficient quantity to meet the demand. I would like to know where they come from. I realize they're published by Novartis, but I would like to know how they get to the district. Do we buy them? If so, I'd like to know in what quantities and at what frequency and at what cost. As regarding the latter, brochures, are these distributed to all teachers or only to those who request it? So that was his letter to the head school psychologist.
Mm-hmm.
This is what she replied. This letter is in response to your request for information regarding the booklets by Larry Silver. In my research, I have discovered that the booklets were not ordered, but were in fact given to the district by a Novartis representative. The booklets were then distributed to parents and teachers when a need to provide additional information was indicated. At this time, the district has no plans to procure additional copies. You may contact directly Novartis Corporation, Pharmaceuticals Division, Summit, New Jersey, for more information. There you have it.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because when you're back then, when you're there and you're a parent that's newly given this information and this diagnosis or the news, you almost feel like, it's the narrative, it's doctors, it's scientists, it must be true, right?
Yes, in our impressionistic, gullible selves back then, we did, but not anymore.
Well, this is now years later, but at the time, so tell me about, so you guys, what was that moment like, or when do you decide to go with medication to actually, I guess you were probably in the space of let's try it out, or let's.
Yeah, we did a trial of medication, and it was 5 milligrams. It was in 93, and Andy took, this was Ritalin, 5 milligrams in the morning before he went to school. And a lot of kids took it during lunch. They didn't have the, the longer lasting medications back then. I think they were just, coming in, but we didn't do that. And so, he took his pill every morning, and then he, left for school. Sometimes because we aren't pill takers at all, and that's a big factor in your in the acceptability of the appropriateness of whether you are going to drug your child, is whether you're on any kind of drug. Becomes much more palatable. Yeah, so Andy took it Monday through Friday, didn't take it on the weekends, didn't take it during any summer vacations. That was.
And was it a instant academic improvement?
No. It was, I think it almost could have had a placebo effect. It was like a very low dosage, really. 5 milligrams is very low. He did, let me see, 3rd grade, 4th, into 5th grade, Andy did start having some adverse drug reactions, some side effects. I think it was cardiac arrhythmia. Through all this, I would like to say that the pediatrician that we dealt with I do not fault her at all. She was very conservative, very cautious. We did the questionnaires. She did, I remember she gave me, because she knew that we were, sitting on the fence, very reluctant, very skeptical. She did give me a book by Thomas Hartman, A Different Perception of ADD is.
Yep.
Is that what it is, Roman?
Yeah. And Tom is actually going to be on our podcast.
Yes, and he's interviewed. And I remember she gave me that book, and it just added to the confusion, because I thought, well, here's this booklet by, Larry Silver telling me it's, makes my kid normal. And then it was really, I'm just shaking my head, because we just didn't know what to do. Anyway, but what we did do was put Andy on the medication, and then he developed the cardiac arrhythmia. Sometimes he was, gasping for air at school a few times. And if I was home, I worked part-time as an occupational therapist. If I was home, they would call me, and he ended up down in the nurse's office. And he was, very bad chest pains under his chest, and sometimes kind of just couldn't breathe real well. So I would bring him home, and that would go away. I would take him then to the pediatrician, get an appointment, have it checked out. We had a, EKG, nothing definitive. But we did keep on with the medication. And then I come to find out that when he did end up down in the nurse's office, I remember she said to me, that the school nurse, she said, well, it just couldn't be the medication, because both of my boys are on it, and they don't have any side effects. It just makes all the difference in the world. There again,
see, it's interesting.
There's somebody else that, okay, and now I'm hearing this, and I heard it from the other teacher, and it's just like, that was a hellish nightmare, those years, because
I'm sure it was, yeah.
So much.
And see, there's the fallacy again that I believe is a huge factor that steers parents in this direction, is that we sort of tend to put all kids in the same basket, so that if it works for that woman's son, if there's no side effects for him or her, then there shouldn't be any for you, for your son, for your child. And that's, right. To me, that's where the Russian roulette comes in.
Yes. Yes.
So sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. You were saying
no.
hellish years.
Yeah. So then by that time it was 5th grade, and at the end of 5th grade, they were transitioning into middle school. And so I think at that point, my husband and I, it was like, this is gonna be different, going in, a whole new start, going into another school? Was Andy, mature enough to go into the middle school into 6th grade? So we wanted to stop. We just thought over summer vacation, no more medication. We're just going to let it go. We're just going to regroup, and things are going to be different. Mm-hmm. Well, it seems this particular, not just this particular, but I think a lot of school districts, this 6th grade, for Andy, it was probably like going into his, I'd say maybe his first year at a junior college. The workload was unbelievable. There again, in this district, it was very highly academic. A lot of the kids were being coached starting in middle school for their SAT tests. They were really getting them on track for the top name schools. Once again, that just wasn't my husband, our approach. We were just trying to let them grow up in their own time and in their own way. Yeah. And so with Andy, the workload was just way too much for him. It was way too much for a lot of kids, particularly boys. And I know a lot of them that were tanking, and a lot of them then where it was that 6th grade year, 6th and 7th grade year into middle school. Looking back on it after all these years, that's when they were getting diagnosed and drugged. Mm-hmm.
But for you, it was now. So he had been on medication. He had side effects, and then what was the moment? Tell me about the moment when you and your husband said, "Okay, no." Well,
see that we did say no when he went into 6th grade. We thought that was going to be the end of this, but then one of his teachers could see that Andy just wasn't keeping up again. He just wasn't organized enough. He wasn't performing enough. Well, she suggested that we put Andy on Dexedrine. I'll never forget that. We had a meeting. She called a meeting. And sure enough, guess what? I went to the doctor, and I still had all the skepticism. And well, then Andy, we walked away with a week's worth of Dexedrine, and he took that before school. But then that was keeping him up at until say 1 or 2 o'clock the next morning. Yep. And it was keeping me up too. Well, of course. And after that, after a few days of that, maybe we gave it a go. And after that, I thought, nope, no more of this. This is just, this is not right. Something was really wrong. And so I remember I went then back to his pediatrician, took Andy. And she said, this was in 1996. And she gave me, it was a VHS copy of a program that she had taped. It had been on PBS. It was called ADD, A Dubious Diagnosis by John Merrill of Learning Matters Incorporated in New York City. And I would have to say that it saved Andy's life, and our lives too, because I can't thank her enough that she gave me this copy. I mean, it's weird to think now with all, so many years later that it was actually a VHS copy. And but I took it home, and I think a couple of days later, my husband and I, we sat down and watched it. And what it shows on there is they interview a DEA agent, Gene Hayslip from Washington, D.C., from the Office of Diversion Control. They interviewed Dr. Peter Bregan, a psychiatrist.
Yep.
And they interviewed some teachers, school psychologists, lots of parents, boys who were on medication. And what they really reveal, they interview officials from CHAD, which is a national support group for people who think they have ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
And what they really show on this video is the partnership. Some would say the collusion between Novartis Pharmaceuticals, the public school system, and CHAD.
Mm.
And after we watched that, we really realized how we'd been suckered into believing that this was a neurobiological disorder, that it's really just a very well orchestrated, well financed marketing campaign. And that's all that it is. And apparently, unfortunately, America has bought into it big time.
Yeah. And I just want to point out to our listeners that Sue, you know, a former occupational therapist at schools, but also a mom going through this, but you have really seen behind the curtain now for close to 30 years. And so I just want to point out, and you and I have had many conversations, that this isn't just some conspiracy theory, because we are living in a time where everything that goes against the main narrative is now considered a conspiracy theory. And
it's not it's not an X-Files conspiracy. It's a business plan. It's marketing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I say this all the time. I say, look, it's not a secret that a pharmaceutical company, or in some cases nowadays, vaccine companies, it's a business. They have to make money. If they don't make money, they go out of business. And the bigger your overhead, the more profits you have to make. It's not a secret to anyone. It shouldn't be a secret to anyone, right? So, but it's then when you have a conflict of interest, when you have a pharmaceutical company giving pamphlets to a school, where I feel we're crossing that fine line,
Yes. Once again, I'm just sitting here shaking my head, because it's beyond me that that this has been allowed to continue for as long as it has. Now, when it does come to the use of medications, a person, if they do want to use a drug, they should really be given accurate, medically sound information that has been proven. It's never been proven that there is a neurochemical imbalance. There's been thousands and thousands and thousands of studies that have been done on the effects of the medication, but there is not a study out there that validates that ADHD is due to a neurochemical imbalance. Yeah. That it's a neurobiological disorder. It's I'd like to see it. if there is.
Well, it's great because you bring up a good point, because we're also working with Bob Whitaker, who has Mad in America.
Yes.
And I invite our listeners to visit that site, Mad in America, because Bob has years and years of research into psychiatry, psychology, into how mental disorders are treated, how medications abused or overprescribed. And he is just a wealth of knowledge and research. And he's a very credible man. And he once told me, he said, look, science is continuously trying to discover new things or discover the ways the brain works or the medication works. Science doesn't have the answer that's now the answer forever. They keep evolving their answer. They keep studying. They keep doing research. The problem, I think, here is media, right? So when a parent hears science says it's a chemical imbalance, right? And years ago, I mean, it's like 30, 40 years ago. And for some reason, the newer science that actually debunks that or disproves that sort of gets shoved in the background because it doesn't serve the players involved. And that makes sense,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So the question is, as a parent, and you know this, like, what did you have to go on? And I'm leading you here, but if the evidence was so strange, at some point you had to trust something inside of you to say something's fishy.
It was I think maybe just my parental intuition. We have 3 boys and they're all different, and I just wanted them. I wasn't looking for perfection. I think I played off a lot of what was going on in our community that was very much like a Stepford community.
Mm-hmm.
They really wanted, the top-notch, the best kids that you could raise. Well, I still just didn't want to haul Andy off for, tutoring. And, we had the music lessons, the sports, some art lessons. But it just was, I started feeling very odd and almost ostracized and shunned. That I started talking to a lot of parents about this, and well, their children were on Ritalin, and the parents were maybe on Prozac, or it was just it was like a drug-infested community, and it was, because there were a lot of physicians that lived there. It was but it just was a real mismatch for me after a while. And
yeah. And it's great because you said parental intuition, right? You have to. Same with my wife and I, we had to trust that not only we know our son better than these people know him, right?
Yes.
But more so, you just have to trust when something feels a little off. And it's hard nowadays because of all this political and COVID and all these conspiracy and fake news. I feel like we're entering the age where we are forced to listen to our gut, really. And you did that, and this is 30 years ago. So I think that's pretty amazing.
It's interesting because I knew something wasn't right, but I didn't know how humongous this was. And that's what I've learned. Mm-hmm. It just, but I think, and then to talk to Andy today, well, for him, it just wasn't, it's like it's over with for him. he has no residual side effects. He has no cardiac problems. He's not, emotionally or psychologically, he's not, it's almost like a non-event. But I think for me, I would have to say it had become a bit of an obsession, because I was the one that took the phone calls from the teachers. I went, I went to the meetings. My husband, if, we had to schedule him around when I was, working part-time, and my husband working full-time. And so we went to these meetings, and it was, I made the doctor's appointments, got the prescriptions filled. A few times when he forgot to take his medication, I had to walk it down to the school, because the teacher wouldn't let him be in the classroom unless he had taken his medication. So then one time Andy asked me, this is the real kicker. He actually asked me, he said, why do I have to take this? And just so innocently. And I said, because your brain isn't working right. And I told my son that when he was 10 years old. Wow. And that is absolutely heartbreaking. And that's it. Because Andy is he's got such a good character. He's so much fun to be with. And then he told me one thing too. He said the school psychologist, it was always a school psychologist trying to find out what Andy could or couldn't do. And Andy could never understand why he was being taken out of his classroom, and being walked down the hall with this school psychologist and going into this room. And he said, having to do things. I mean, it was being tested, and that is just like, what a waste of time. He was missing valuable classroom time, I guess, if you call it valuable, because he would have thrived in a classroom with a more, more music, drama, art, recess, PE, all those things that have been forsaken for, occupational therapy, school psychologists, and just let's get, back to basics and let the kids have a tolerance of their, different learning styles, and one size. And then two, I remember I went down, I got a book I thought, well, we had that booklet by Dr. Larry Silver. Okay. So he wrote The Misunderstood Child. And I thought, well, yeah, Andy's misunderstood. Well, I got that. But then I remember I got the book by Thomas Armstrong, The Myth of the ADD Child. Yep. And it was the combination of The Myth of the ADD Child and ADD, a dubious diagnosis, that made all the difference in the world. And we let it go. So
that's amazing. And again, Thomas Armstrong is also part of our project. And I'm just so happy, I am too. We have such great experts, and I can't wait to share this film with the world, which we'll have to wait for a little while into next year, but it's all good. But I just want to go back to when you said, so you listen to your intuition, you go for it. But at some point, right, your son and our son did the same thing. It's like they ask, why do I have to take this? What's happening? Yeah. And I believe, and my wife and I said, we called this the collateral damage of a label, of using a word like your brain's not quite working, or, there's an imbalance, or however we explain it to our child. They know, I would say kids pick up, between the lines or under the words, because every parent that's going to try to explain it somehow will have this way of being of pity, or I'm so sorry, but you're not quite like the other kids and we got to do something about it. And to me, that's almost, that sort of builds a lack of self-confidence and a doubt in oneself. And that's almost worse in the long run than just not academically be up to speed in the early years.
Yeah.
You know?
Well,
And
the way I think, let me just interject here.
Please.
The thing that's interesting is in our community, I heard from the same school psychologist that wrote to my husband about the booklets being given to the school system. When I thought Andy, he hadn't been really qualified for special ed, but the district, I remember one evening they had a meeting and for special ed, and I went to that. And she said at the meeting, she said that our particular district had the highest consumption rate of Ritalin in the state of Washington. Wow. And that was back in 1996. And what was interesting about this is Andy never felt, different, because it turned out that so many of his friends were on it. It had become the norm. So he didn't feel different because everybody else was being drugged up, had been, identified and diagnosed and drugged up. And boy, thinking of this is just bizarre to think that that we lived in that kind of environment was not healthy to me. It might seem healthy to other people, but it didn't seem healthy to me.
Yeah. And, look, it's a good point, because I'm not here to say these stimulant drugs are going to hurt every single child who takes them or are going to affect them in the long run. I don't know that. I'm not a scientist. I know there are studies that actually prove that it's not necessarily a lasting academic improvement. It means that the child can focus in the short term and memorize stuff and spit it back out for a test, right, to get a good grade. But in the long run, it actually doesn't, I hate to say heal or cure, but it doesn't really take care of the root, the issue. And the issue, I think, is we're trying to squeeze these kids into this educational system box, and not every child is made for it. And clearly Andy wasn't made to follow these rules in a certain way, right? Yeah. And maybe you tell me, but I'd like to jump forward and address something that's the biggest concern of parents, right? So the biggest concern of parents is like, if I don't medicate my child, if I don't do what they say I should be doing so my child can function in this world, the parents are worried that their kids will not, quote unquote, turn out, that they will not be able to live a successful life. And so I just want to jump
successful, that they'll be a failure.
And you are here, or we are here to disprove that myth, because Andy, from what I've heard, turned out great. So maybe let's talk about Andy and see what he's up to.
Yeah. Okay.
If you could just tell us. Yeah.
Yeah. Andy,
now 30, how old is he now?
Andy's 36 years old.
36. That's right. Yep.
Lives up in Washington. Yeah. And he's involved in two businesses up there. And he likes to travel. He went to college, and he's a wonderful cook. I can't wait to visit him this fall, because I don't even have to lift a finger in the kitchen. He's always whipping up something. I tell him that he should write a cookbook call it Cooking on All Four Burners. Nice. He always was, I would say that he was always a bit of a quirky, messy kind of a person. And my saying about Andy was, creative minds are rarely tidy, because he wasn't real good about cleaning up first he was doing his, I called them art messes. Okay. He was always fooling around with, at Christmas, glue and glitter. And he liked to, color and his Play-Doh and all of that. And then he that transformed into, his cooking. And he can he can whip up some really decent meal out of practically, nothing.
That's great.
But he's friendly. He's got a lot of friends. He and his girlfriend just got engaged a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, congratulations.
And yeah, thank you. Wow. And so he's real happy. And
just so you know, for parents that are listening, Andy ended up going to get a degree, correct?
Yeah.
And he went to college.
Yes. And, excuse me. And that's another thing. His second grade teacher told us that the rate he was going, he would probably not go to college. She told us that. Mm-hmm. Yep. That just, this little nugget is stuck in my brain. I mean, it's just, ooh, boy. So.
Well, it's very similar with our son. We were told that if we didn't medicate, that A, he would self-medicate later, and B, he might end up becoming a druggie or go to jail.
Yes, we were told the same thing. To me, it's like a script, Roman. It's a shame that all these years later that you were told the same thing. And I really do think the teachers have been, educated, if you want to say indoctrinated into this ideology that they're well-meaning, they're well-intentioned, but inadvertently, they play a huge role in this. And they really need to be all the teachers, I would say all the non-essential teaching personnel, the OTs, the social workers, the school psychologists really need to be re-educated as to what this is all about. And I think this is where, your documentary ADHD is Over is going to play a huge role.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. That's definitely our goal. Our goal is, this is meant to be educational. We're not making an anti-anything. We're making a pro-education, a pro-awareness, a pro-options, pro-alternative, because from my research, just being on lots of ADHD support groups online where most of the members are women, are mothers, and most of them are divorced or single or separated. And so the husbands or the boyfriends or the men in their lives have sort of left the scene. Sure. And so, of course, I get the frustration, right? When you're a single parent and you have no other option, you have three jobs and the kid needs to sit still. I get it. There is a quick fix pill, but as if we're not aware that it's really just a Band-Aid and should be temporary so that we can change our lives around to accommodate the child's learning style or their personality, if we take it as the healing, the only thing that can actually make them productive in life, then I have to say you obviously have majorly disproven that with your story, that your son, after getting off of medications, actually did better, went to get a degree. He is living a good life. He's got a partner. I mean, I would say, he turned out is sort of the term, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. But I can say that this took at least, a huge toll on our marriage. I mean, just a lot of unhappiness. And it was just, it was like a ADHD cloud. I mean, it gnawed at us, not especially at me. Mm-hmm. It was just, I think, always on my mind because it was just like, well, what do we do? It's like, what's wrong with Andy? He's just not good enough. And and there's something here that's going to make him better. What the drugs do is they provide, temporary symptomatic relief. One of the things that the ADHD, the proponents say is that, ADHD is like, diabetes and insulin.
Right. For
Well,
the brain, yeah.
the thing there is, what with type 2 diabetes anyway, it really has to do with diet and exercise. It's a lifestyle choice. And it's the same thing with, I think, attention deficit disorder or ADHD, especially in America, where we use probably, I'd say, somewhere between 80 and 85% of all the stimulants that are manufactured. I don't think it's ever dropped below 80%. But in this rapid fire culture, we really have to take a look at what is going on in America that's driving this. I mean, documentaries, Fast Food Nation. Would there be a documentary like Fast Food Nation? Would that be Fast Food Nation? Would Italy be considered a fast food nation? Well, if not, then why is America? And I think if you look at the consumption rate of the, around the rest of the world, it's America, Canada, Australia, and then in other countries such as Italy, France, Germany, certainly Scandinavian countries, it's literally non-existent.
Yeah, and I think it has to do with, obviously, the American dream has sort of become this rat race of capitalism, and you need to have more and get there faster. I hate the term the grind. You got to grind, and you got to work when others are sleeping, and if not, you're going to lose out. It's almost this fear of losing out, right? Fear of missing out, or they call it FOMO. America's become a FOMO country because it's like everybody is afraid they're going to miss out on either the American dream, the money, the fame, all that stuff, right? And while all that's happening, we're actually not living our lives. We're actually letting our lives and our families slip through the crack. Yeah. And that's why I believe there's a huge mental health epidemic and an opioid, crisis. And these are clear signs. These are not just coincidentally here in America, So we've got here in America, we've got some real basic work that needs to be done. And a lot of it has with a trust level between people. We've got epidemic of loneliness, even before COVID-19. So we've things can change. I'm very hopeful with this situation, with this ADHD situation. Yeah. Yeah, I think I agree with you. This is it's not doomsday prophecy. We're not doomed. I mean, you are certainly a great example with your son, Andy. You and your husband did the work. You went through, I hate to call it hell, but it seems like it at the time, right? And you did it. And if you didn't do that, you wouldn't have been available to me and other people in this community. And so I'm standing on giants. I'm standing on the shoulders of giants like yourself who've done a lot for this community and for the children and the parents. And it's my duty to continue that work and to continue showing parents and children that there's an alternative narrative that perhaps may take a little longer and take a little more work and life adjustment, but we're both here to say it's so worth it.
It is. And then your lives will be much more fulfilled and fun, and you'll feel liberated and not oppressed and not under the thumb of I'm not sure who.
Well, it's a good point. Like, what thumb are we under? I think it's many thumbs, right?
Yes.
I think there's the educational system, there's the pharmaceutical companies, there's the other sort of, businesses that profit from the therapies and all this stuff. And, it's business, but at the same time, if parents aren't aware of what's available, what other alternative narratives that could be listened to, then we're going to keep feeding that same machine that, in a sense, emotionally numbs these children and makes them, I hate to say robots, because again, this is not a conspiracy theory, but it really makes them obedient learners of what I call outdated information, because everything we can learn at school right now, the way it's structured, you can learn on Google and YouTube anytime.
Yeah.
But no one's teaching emotional intelligence and, how to have successful relationships and how to do, even don't get me started on sex education. There's all these things that we could be teaching children that we're not teaching at school because we're afraid if they academically miss the boat that they won't turn out. And I think that's an old paradigm.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, we definitely need a paradigm shift. Yeah. And
yeah.
I think there's possibilities. Yeah. I mean, I'm shaking my head up and down and not side to side like I was, through quite a bit of this.
Yep.
It's like, yes, and it's time to move forward.
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong or add to it if you'd like, but I would like to maybe leave our listeners with this at the end of our podcast is that, the education system is not going to change on its own because it's a supply and demand kind of scenario. Once parents stop demanding this academic rigor that comes from this fear-based mentality of my son or daughter must be top of the class, must get a great job, to be successful. When parents will stop demanding that and demanding more of emotional intelligence curriculums and have it be more balanced for all types of learners, when we demand that, it's going to slowly change. And that's my prediction, but hopefully I'm right.
Yeah. It's bigger, than just the education system. It's being, there's a book out there by a doctor, Dr. Carl Elliott. It's Better Than Well, American Medicine Meets the American Dream. And it's what we're doing to ourselves, internally and externally with, he goes into, cosmetic psychopharmacology with the neuroenhancers, which, Ritalin is really old stuff, but, the Adderall and the Vyvanse and Foculin. And then, we've got to look at, so we're ADHD nation, we're Ritalin nation. These are titles of books. Prozac nation. It's a very multifaceted, multidimensional problem that we're really talking here. It has to do with your overall ideology of, what you find appropriate and acceptable and how much you can, tolerate with, I tell audiences with the individual differences of temperament and developmental, diversity. I mean, not every little baby, say, sits up when they're sits up real well when they're 6 months old. Sometimes it might take them till they're almost 8 months old. Not every child is walking when they're 12 months old. They might not walk independently until they're 14 months old. Like Andy, he wasn't walking on his first birthday. He figured out on his own he didn't walk real well till he was 15 months old because he crawled faster and he was following his big brother around. And he there was nothing developmentally wrong with him. We've just got to be real careful when we try and categorize kids so early on, and then you trust, what a person, an expert is telling you. A lot of these so-called, disorders, diagnoses, the disorders are in the eye of the beholder. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
You talk about, hyperactive children. Well, I would never say that. I would say high energy, because hyperactive, that indicates pathology.
Right.
There was no psychopathology here with Andy. It's more of a sociopathology. It's the sociocultural pathology of what America has become.
Well, that's what I always say. I'm glad you put it that way, because I always say, like, there is not, and this is great, because I was talking to Gabor Mate recently. We had a great call, and he said, he said to me, it was just a lovely interaction. He said to me, well, you say you love my work, but you don't think there's a problem with, kids having ADHD. And I said to him, well, actually, I don't think there's a problem. I think there's friction between the child and the world. And that looks like a problem, and then we pathologize that and we say, oh, well, we need to medicate that because that's actually a sign of, blah, 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 whatever the disorder is, you name it. Right. And I feel like we're not looking at it. If we were, if we're saying the kid's the problem, well, then we're not going to go anywhere, because if you make the kid a problem, then the kid's broken and the kid's going to be dependent on medication for the rest of his or her life. Then it gives us no power as parents, zero power.
Yeah.
Right. And I feel like the power is there when we get to say, you know what, there's some friction there. Maybe we need to find a different school. Maybe we need to change our diet. Maybe mom and dad need to be more loving in the household and more patient with, the kid who runs around and has more energy. There's many things that can be done before we should ever consider the child as the problem. That's just my opinion. But
I think I agree with that. Mm-hmm.
Well, Sue, it's been a great conversation. I know you and I could go on for hours, and
I think
amazing. And perhaps we can do a part 2 as we get closer to the release of the film.
Yes.
So I just want to thank you for your time and your vulnerability and courage to share your, personal family story. And I'm just so glad and grateful that we finally got to get together and do this.
Thank you for having me. And I wish you all the luck in the world with your production.
Well, thank you. And thank you for all your contributions so far. And we shall talk more about ADHD is over.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.